recording. So I'm not going to have time to look at the chat. So if there's any interesting things on the chat, if Mrunali or Adela, you can help out with that, that would be helpful. Okay, let me just get myself organized here. Close windows I don't need, and we'll be ready. Okay, right, so let's start. So my name is John Mortimer, and I am putting on an example of systemic design, because last week there was a session on a new book that came out. Systemic design is something that I've been doing for a long time now, mainly in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And one of the major things that people say is, I know a lot now about these theories, and I know about the tools, and in fact, I've got so many tools on my computer, I don't know what to do with them. What is it? How does it look in a real organization? What are the issues that you face when you actually do this? Those are the really difficult things. Those are the things that we want to know. So that's what this is about. This is going through an example of what it looks like. This is not the only way to do it, of course. There are many different ways to do systemic design. And my definition of systemic design is the combination of systems thinking, complexity, change, and an idea of how businesses work. So that's what I think systemic design is. It's all that mixed up in a pot and squirted out into an organization. So the way that I do this is I go into an organization, and this is what you're going to see. I go into an organization and we find that they got a problem and they brought me in to fix a problem. And of course I don't fix the problem because this is systemic design. What I do is I help them to uncover what the problem is, and then we work out jointly what that might look like. So let's start at the beginning, and the beginning is here. Now, what can you see? Adela, can you just tell me what you see, please?
Nothing just yet, apart from you.
Okay. So, see, I've got two things to share. That's interesting.
Oh, it's thinking about it. Here we go.
What do you see now?
Transformation in design and services.
Do you see my notes?
I don't see your notes. No, I just see the slide.
It's working.
Cool.
Okay, so this is what we're going to look at. And let me just get rid of a couple of things. Okay, so where are we going to start? We're going to start in 1776. Why are we starting in 1776? If you're in the UK and you look at a £20 note that we had up until last year, I think it was, on the back of that £20 note, it says this: the division of labour in pin manufacturing. What on earth does that mean? And did you know that that was on the back of a £20 note? It was so important that they put it on this note. So Adam Smith came up with what was probably the most important part of the Industrial Revolution, which is you get a flow of work and you split it up into separate little functions. And those functions we now call departments in an organization. And then this guy came along, and his name was Frederick Taylor. What's so important about him? He applied science to management. This was about 100 years ago. He created what was called scientific management. Now, the reason we're talking about this is the bizarre thing is that the way that we design and manage organizations today have come from those two places. So it's not quite so innovative and young as we think. So what that did is create an organization that in the mind of a designer or a manager looks a bit like a machine. It's got inputs, it's got people that do things in the middle, and it's got outputs. And to make it simple, we see it as a machine, and we typically fit people into roles into that machine. And a classic diagram of what that machine looks like, of course, is a hierarchy diagram. So it's controlled through this kind of diagram. That's how an organization works. And can you see that the way that it actually works is across the hierarchy, but we don't see that in that diagram. You'll know all about this. But I'm just going back over some of the sort of the background to this, because systems thinking is a fundamentally different way to look at and understand our services and our organizations, but also how we behave. And that's the premise that I'm coming at it in this case. So this was a local government in the UK, and this is what they asked that they wanted. We don't want any big changes. We've got some issues and we want you to help us to fix those issues. And actually, this is the first piece of work that we're doing with you. So we're testing you. And I had little idea of what this was about because I had never worked in this service before. Did it matter? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? This is the design approach that I use, and I will give you a link to the detail of this at the end of this slideshow. I call it the triple diamond. And it is based on systems thinking and design. The first element of it is understand. So let's start with this organization. I had a commitment of the leadership. So it was the leader of the deputy director that called me in. And I said, right, what we need to do is get a team of people, of your frontline people, together permanently, full time for 4 weeks. And what we're going to do is we're going to learn. We're going to learn about what the problem is within your service. And it's going to, what we're going to do is we're going to find that it's going to, the answers are going to emerge. And what we're going to do, we're going to use your team because we're going to engage with them and we're going to engage with the customer. So these are all things that were sort of slightly odd to the person that brought me in. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to write a report at the end, which for a public sector was quite shocking. Okay, so what is the service? The service was housing allocations. Housing allocations is where we have social housing, government housing, and we distribute that housing to people who are in the most need. So this occurs across many countries across the world. In this country, we call it housing allocations. The very first thing I do on day one with the team is I ask them, what's the purpose of the service? And they tell me. They say, oh, okay, this is what it is. The purpose of the service is to give people a house. I'll just pause at this point. Is everybody okay? Can you all see me okay? And is everything working? Adela or Murunali?
Yeah, we're working fine. Could you just make me a co-host so I can mute some people, because as people coming in, their mics are still on and they're not noticing, and I can't really control it. So if you just sort that out, then I can take care of it. But everything is great.
Okay. How do I make you co-host, please?
So if you go on my name in the participants and then click more, it should give you the option to make me a co-host.
Done.
Fabulous. Right, we're good to go.
Mrinali, I'll do the same to you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's get back to where we were, huh? Right. And don't hesitate to shout if something isn't quite working right. That's kind of normal. Right, we're here, yeah? So you can just see a screen, you don't see my notes. Good. So, purpose is to give people a house. And what we're going to do is we're starting in the understand phase. So the understand phase is to understand the problem and the service from a systems thinking perspective. That takes 4 weeks in this case. So quite a lot of detailed work here. So start off with purpose. Purpose is to give people a house, and the demand comes into the organization through a 14-page form, either online or handwritten. 14 pages. So a lot of information comes in. We need a lot of information. So the model that we use for understand is this. Demand comes into the organization, and what we're interested in doing is looking at what kind of demand is it and what matters to people when they come into our organization. And we want to do this individually. And from that, we get an idea, what is the purpose of this service? But not is what is the purpose from what we think it is, but what is the purpose from the customer's perspective, or in this case, the citizen's perspective. Now, this is a really important part of systems thinking. It's an outside-in perspective. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at how good our service is, how we respond to that demand. And when we've done that, we're going to look at the flow of work all the way through, from the very beginning to the very end. And not just within our organization, it's the beginning and the end to the end from the citizen's perspective. So if they go to a different organization, we have to follow that. And then what we do, so that's all quite a mechanical stuff. What we then do as number 5 is we ask the question, why is it designed this way? Who designed it and why is it designed this way? And then number 6, which is what are our behaviors? What is our management approach that has created the design in this way? So in a nutshell, that's the model that we had over the 4 weeks. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with number 1. Let's start with demand. So typically what we did with demand is literally sat at the customer service center, put on a set of headsets and listen to the demand coming in. And over time, what we did is we recorded those down and we slowly handed that task off to the people in the contact center. So in the first week, by the end of the first week, we got the contact center staff to record these demands in the way that makes sense to the citizen, not to us. So if you look at some of those demands, they are almost all starting with I. We have not categorized them. The citizen categorizes them based on what we have found that they ask. I'm in need of housing. I am chasing something. I'm waiting for something and you haven't done it, so I'm phoning you up or I'm emailing you, whatever it is. One interesting thing that we've done at this point is, so we've got all these demands, and we measured a period of a month. I can't remember how many hundreds of demands there were, but we summarized them into this diagram here. That's a summary of a month's worth of work for the contact center. And we've split them up into 2 types. One type is failure demand, which is, let's start with the green one. We started with value demand, which is the demand that we're here for, the demand that the service should be providing. And on the right-hand side are the failure demands. The failure demands are the demands that we have caused. We have caused by designing the system in a particular way that it causes people to chase, it causes people to ask questions, it causes people to do things that they don't actually necessarily need to do in a perfect world. So at this point, the team have gone through purpose, gone through demand, gone through value and failure. And what was really interesting is that the failure demand was 63% of the total demands that were coming in. Now, from a management and design perspective, that is key. Because at this point, I would ask you, we don't have enough time to do all this stuff, I'm afraid, but I will just ask you quickly, what can we do with a failure demand? Someone unmute yourself and just shout it out. Come on, you clever designers. What we can do with a failure demand, we can design it out. This is caused by the design of the service. So in theory, we should be able to design out up to 63% of all the demands coming in. Now, from a management perspective and a cost perspective and everything, that's enormous. So let's see what we actually ended up doing. Right. Okay. The other important thing, of course, is measures. Measures are a critical part of this. And how do we measure? How would we measure? Now, in the public sector in particular, you've got central government imposing measures. So you put all that aside. I'm interested in systemic measures. I'm interested in outside-in measures. So again, if we had the time, I would ask you to think about what would be the measures from a citizen's perspective. So just think about that for a moment. And what the team came up with from a citizen's perspective is around the purpose. Well, from when I say I want a house to when I get one, the time it takes. Yeah, end-to-end time. Funnily enough, they hadn't actually been measuring this, but that's what they came up with. They came up with a few more things, but this was the central one. And this was really interesting because this is the sheet that we had on the wall. Do you notice, by the way, that none of this is digital? And before any of you, because when I do this with teams, they all start laughing. They call me a dinosaur and all this stuff, but there's a really, really good reason why it's not digital, which I will talk about later on. So our capability from when I apply to when I am suitably housed, or when you've solved my problem, how long does it take? That's what mattered to people. When we listen to them on the phone, that's what mattered to people. So we decided to take a year's worth of data. And what did we find? So this was about end of second week. So what we did is we put all that into a chart and we averaged it out. It was a bit of a difficult thing. We just took one point was a day. Now, what's important to note is this is very common in these systems, is that they had to categorize the more important and urgent ones to the less important ones. So they had 3 categories: bronze, which was the lowest grade. You weren't in that greater need. Silver, you were kind of more needy, and gold, you were in real need and you needed help very quickly, and significant help potentially. So let's have a look at what we found. So we looked at the middle dotted line on there. By the way, middle dotted line is the average, and the upper line is the upper control limit, which is a control chart mathematical thing. We're not going to go into all the details of that. We're just going to look at the moment, the mean. So the mean is halfway, basically. Bronze band was 655 days. So we didn't help people for an average of 655 days. What about silver? So at this point, we were showing this to the manager, right? The assistant director, and he was going, "Oh, that's really bad. But it's only bronze band, you know. They're not that bad off." So silver, 750. So at this point, the assistant director, I think his mouth got stuck open. And then we went to gold. At this point, he fell off his chair. What we had done is we'd reframed the problem from a different perspective, and he suddenly realized that what little problems he thought he had were not the problem. There was something else going on here. And this is a key element of looking at this from a systemic perspective, an outside-in perspective. It suddenly takes you into somewhere else very quickly and very sharply. On week 2, we also looked at something. We looked at the flow. And with the flow, we looked at the detail of every single activity. And the way that we did this is we sat with the people that did the work and we went through that step by step. All we need to know now, and this is the summary from the team. By the way, no one in the team knew how the whole thing worked because they all did. Don't forget, we split it up into departments. We all did a little bit. There were 87 steps. Only 7 of those steps directly contributed towards purpose. 7 out of the 87. 7 steps directly contributed to purpose. What the hell were the other 80 doing? So that's one way of looking at it. And another way of looking at it was I asked the team, because they didn't know about the people that came to them. When I came to them, they had 3 computer screens in front. They were people that worked in IT. They didn't actually talk to people. God, no. So we had to, I realized this. So we said, right, we've got to get to know people. So we took 16 people in detail, and we looked through their records. We found out how long they've been on our system. We looked at all the correspondence about them, and we phoned them up and try to work out what was going on. And that was the point where the team started to really understand what mattered to these people and how they're being treated by us. But there was a person in the team who a couple of times said to me, look, John, I don't really know. I don't think I fit in this team very well. I don't really know what we're doing. I don't get what's going on. I don't get what the rest of the team are doing. They seem to be coming up with all these insights and I'm not. So this is really common where people are in a service for so long, they can't change their perspective. So what I did is I said, okay, here's one, just picked at random, and I want you to imagine that you are her and go through everything, what it was like to go through her, not from our perspective, but from her perspective. Write down the dates, write down what we did, write down what we said to her. At the end of this, she spent a day doing this, doing nothing else. At the end of the day, she suddenly realized that for this person, it took 13 months to properly get on the system. And all the convolutions and all the hassle and all that, she then realized, I've now got it. So she wanted to stay on the team. But you can see how difficult this is sometimes to do this. So at the end of the 4 weeks, one of the things I asked them is, what is it like to work here? Because now they'd like got an understanding of what it's like. We don't talk to people, we process applications. That's what we do. And actually, we don't really want to talk to people because when we do, they get aggressive. So we don't want to talk to them anyway. And you know what? They lie. People come to us and they openly lie in our face about what they need. And when I do talk to people, it must be behind glass because I want to feel safe. The IT system defines the flow of work, so we can't change it. And we have no idea how good we are. We just like process. We don't know, the first time we saw that chart was the first time we had any idea how well we were working. And this is what the supervisor told me when I first arrived, because they have a waiting list, right, of 6,000 people. It's not a big town. Well, it's a medium-sized town. So he said, look, the only way you can help us, John, is if you can give 6,000 houses to us. Okay, right. Well, that put me in my place, didn't I? By the way, I had no idea about housing allocations. This was the second time I'd come across it. And the first time was not a very good experience. And they said that their job is managing the IT that's in front of them. So that was the end of the 4 weeks. Almost the end of the 4 weeks. The last thing I wanted them to do is to summarize all this. So for those of you who understand some design, we've diverged, and now we've oh goodness, we've gone out and then we go back in. So we go out and we find a load of stuff, and then we come down in and we summarize. So we diverge down and try to make sense in a simple way of all the stuff that we've learned. So I say, right, put the map of what the system works like on one sheet of paper. This is what they did. This is what it is, in a simplistic way. Now, let me just go through this so that we can work it out in a digital way. So a form or a demand comes in through the website. If it's in the post, we have to index it, we have to sort it, we have to check whether it's correct, and we have to check what band they're on. So initially, everyone is on a bronze band until we know what their necessities are. It may be that they submit a medical form. And if they submit a medical form, we have to do some extra work. And sometimes people can appeal. So if you don't agree with the banding, you can appeal. And you have to send a formal letter in. We have to go through a formal process. That is really, really horrible. the appeal has to be done by a set of people that are different, and it takes a whole darn day to do some appeals. Really difficult. They hate doing that. And if you go through medical thing, you can get your ban changed. We then have to update the system because people are on there for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I think the person was on there for 20 years. So as their situation changed, we have to keep updating the system because they have children and they get married and all that kind of stuff. And quite often the information that they submit to us is not correct. So we have to send it back to them. And then once they've gone through all this, they sit at their computer and they wait for the advertisement to come up. So at this time, the advertisement came up on the web. It also came out in the newspaper. So it had a picture of all the properties that are available. And we used to have a brochure, a newsletter where we sent it out as well, where they could come and pick it up. So the advert went out. People that were able to, they thought that was the right property for them, they would bid. They put a bid on. We would have to match and verify that bid. And then we would come up with the one that was at the top of the priority list, and we would make them an offer. And they would get the property. Hey, that's how it works. So that's how the majority of systems in this country, probably 95%, work that way. Okay. Now at this point, and there were 6,000 people on the list. So that's what everyone was focused on. We got so many properties, we can't help everybody. Just for a moment or two, how would you redesign this? Just have a quick thought how you might redesign that to improve it. Don't forget, I had no idea. No idea. The only idea I had was understanding systemic design. How good is the system? So this is the question I asked the team and the assistant director at the end of the 4 weeks. How good is it? It's shit. Okay. At this point, it was really bad. The assistant director was not a happy person. He now didn't want to just do some tweaks. He wanted to fundamentally change the darn thing. He knew that the design was the problem. How well was it helping people? Not very well. Not very well at all. That graph that you saw were only the people that we actually housed. What are all the people that we didn't house? It's even worse. What are the causes? So, what we did in, here we go. What we did in the understand phase is that we put numbers. We wanted to actually look at this flow. So we took a month. In 1 month, there were 285 demands coming in for I want to be housed. 75% of those demands were not up to our standard. So we sent them back and asked people to complete them again. That would be people would like that, wouldn't it? Yeah. 95 of those people had submitted a separate medical form, and the appeals, it took 6 months to deal with a medical form on average. And we had 27 appeals a month, those things that we really hate. And it takes 7 months to deal with appeals. We had 105 advertisements going out. We had 2,600 bids. 35 people refused the offers that we gave them. And we housed 87 people. Okay, so when we ask the questions again, how good is it? How well does it help people? What are the causes? You can see now that we're really getting to the nitty-gritty. The team had no idea about these figures before we did this work. Right. Remember the purpose? Purpose was to give people a house. What is the purpose now? The team said, we process application forms. We make it difficult for people to get houses. Right. So this is where we are. We're at the end of the understand box, and we are starting the experiment. So the experiment was going to be take the same team, a few more weeks, and look at what we can learn. The purpose of the experiment is to learn. So we know how crap it is. We now want to learn how we can do things differently. So we're in a room separate from everybody else. And what we do is we have a set of principles. We take a case and we take it through to completion. We take a demand. What matters determines what we do. What matters to the citizen determines what we do, regardless of what we think. We just do the value work. So remember the 7 steps out of the 87? I said to the team, you should only do those 7 steps. Don't do anything else. At this point, they were ready to leave the room, but I'd locked the door. You make decisions based on evidence, not opinions. So we don't want a manager coming in and saying, I want you to do it this way. We're here to learn, and we're here to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes, and that's how we learn. So don't worry if we make mistakes. And we design to meet the demand. We will use digital when it helps us, no other time. So we started to take demands, and this is an example of how we started to record those demands. I barely gave them any ideas. What they did is they wrote down the titles on a sheet of paper that was on the wall, and they would add in columns when they thought it was a good idea to measure something. So they added in later what the waste steps should be, for instance, the number of waste steps, because they realized that they weren't just doing the 7 steps, they were actually adding some waste steps. But they wanted to record that because over time, they wanted those waste steps to reduce. So the first time we did it, the first 2 times we did it, had 13 waste steps. So this is what it looked like at the end of the experiment. We had a whole load of cases. I think we took 35. But this is an example of the way that the team recorded it. Why didn't we record this digitally? Because this was on the wall. They filled in what was on there. The person that filled it in felt the ownership. So everybody in the team would have a part to play. You can see the different writing. It was different people doing it. When someone comes in, a senior person comes in, someone else comes in, anyone in the team can stand up and show them. They don't have to go to a screen and show them the screen. They could scratch things out. This became theirs, or this was always theirs, but it's the ownership and the learning that comes from this that's important. So let's take, I think the first is either the first or the second example, and this was Ivy. So we listened to her, and this was really quite funny because we had to phone her up. We had to find out what the demand was. She'd submitted a form, right? But that isn't what we wanted. The form simplifies and categorizes. We actually had to listen to her directly. My goodness, the team were really afraid to phone her. So we all sat in a room. One person was going to phone her, and we all listened in on the speakerphone. What we found was I would like to downsize for when I know I'm getting older and I have a problem with my right hand side of my body due to a traffic accident, and I'm getting on. It's getting worse, and every year I'm having to pay for my garden because gardeners have to come in, and increasingly they have to do my garden. So I live in a bungalow and I've got a nice garden. And in the present climate, I could do without this cost because I haven't got enough money to live on. And I would like a small garden if possible. So that's why I would like to move. So according to the old system, she isn't entitled to housing because her need isn't very high. So we would wait for her to fall over and have a problem so that she would need a hip replacement, for instance, or a wheelchair before we would move her. But we knew this was going to be what she would end up doing because you could see the trajectory of where this is going. And the kind of properties she wanted were in very high demand. So there was no way that someone like her that wasn't in great need was going to get this. So we put her into bronze band in the old system. But she had no chance. If she bid on a property, she'd have no chance of getting it. But we wouldn't tell her that. We'd give her this false hope that she could bid. So those are all the things that I've just read out. At the end of the day, the team were really annoyed because they couldn't figure out what was going on here. And I said to them that in the principles, that they had to fix this problem. So in the morning of the next day, they phoned her up and go, look, hang on, from everything that you just said, you keep mentioning the garden. What's going on with the garden? Well, it's the garden that's the problem. And she said, why, yeah, but forget the garden. What's the problem with the property? Oh, the property is wonderful. I love living here. So they realized it was the garden that she wanted to move. Now, this might look obvious to you, but for them, this was like, what? We don't deal with gardens, we deal with houses. But we had to fix the problem. So they spent the rest of the morning figuring out how to fix a garden. Okay. Dear. They found a charity that would go into older people's gardens and do gardens free for them. So we put her into contact with this charity and we never heard from her again. At this point, the team were completely, their heads had blown off. So imagine doing this to 35 cases. After doing this to 35 cases, they realized that their purpose wasn't to give people a house. It was to help them to solve their housing problem. Help the citizens to solve their housing problem. So what they'd done is they'd opened the door to their nice confined room about how they thought the world works. They open the door and go, oh shit, the world works very differently to how we think it works. And that was the point at the end of Ivy that they looked at me and said, no, John, don't tell me we're not going to start doing everybody like this, are we? The first few cases were very, very difficult for them. It took a long time to do each one. But as time went on, it slowly got easier and easier. So out of 35, guess how many we had to house? 3 out of 35. The rest of them we dealt with. 56% of the demands were not in housing need. 37% were in some need and 21% were in high need. They had no idea about this before in the old system. They just had bronze, silver and gold. And the question was, how do we now deal with these? So an important part, a systems thinking element here is reframing the problem. So the owner of the system sees their service through a systems lens and their problem dissolves into something totally different. Understanding the purpose of the service is defined by the customer from an outside-in perspective, defines the design of the workflow. And these are some of the systems thinking stuff that you may come across. Right. So in the experiment that we tried to measure and we didn't know what to measure. So they started to measure different things. Oh yeah, we're happy with the advice, because people used to come in and get advice and then they go out and they never come again. So how do you measure that? So we had all sorts of things on trying to measure this, because we weren't giving people a house. We were now giving people advice. How do you measure the advice? So what about the new system? So remember that. Okay. The first step. So this is the new design, right? We're going to listen to the customer. So no forms. People had to come in and we had to listen to them. I mean, when I say listen, I really mean listen. We had to ask them what they need and we had to understand their problem. And we wrote their details on a sheet of paper. So these are all the steps, not just the value steps, but the steps. We then, together with them, at the same time that they're sitting in front of us, we assess their level of need and we discuss what that looks like and we tell them. And we identify potential options together in the same conversation. And two things. We either house them, don't forget, out of 35, we only house 3. So maybe we house them, or more likely, we help them to look for housing themselves. But we help them because very often people come to us because they need some help with that, or maybe they don't. So we moved from, how are we doing for time? Right. We moved from 3 computer systems, forms, letters, the web, to this. So when we started in the prototype, this was a real sheet. So on the left-hand side, you got the flow. On the right-hand side, you got what is recorded. And that's the second side of the same paper. So 2-sided printed sheet. And the waiting list, the technology waiting list, started off as a whiteboard, and there it is. The archive system. So this council were very proud of their archive system. They had stuff in their archive in their basement going back decades, in some cases over 100 years. It was a bloody museum. So they said, how long do we have to keep this stuff, John? So we went and we measured how long we needed to keep it. And the answer was 6 months. So the archive system was a box, 2 boxes. And over time, that developed into shelves where each officer would put their own cases. So they owned their cases. After 6 months, we binned the sheets because when the same person came in, their details, we needed to start again. New approach. We must engage people. We must talk to them. I listen. I manage cases, not I manage IT. We engage and help people. We try our best. It's a good place to work, and we have no IT system yet. It took 2 years before they could work out what IT system they needed. The last thing I'm going to do is go through some the measures. So there was over 6,000 on the waiting list. On the new system, we ended up with 309. The failure demand of 62.7%, we ended up with 3% failure demand. Remember the appeals, the ones that they hated that took up so much time? We had 1 appeal a year. The aggression, frustration moved to engaging and helping people. The demoralized staff turned into staff that really, really wanted to have a go and really valued helping people. We had an unknown true cost to the overall social system. So when you don't house people, all sorts of things happen to them. So we developed lots of links to other groups out there. And this was before austerity started. There were 22 people working in the department. With this system, we only needed 15. Happy senior manager. And that's a graph of the demand over several years. The waiting list went down. So the blue line is the organization, which was Yarmouth. It took a while for it to come down. I think it took 3 years in total. And nationally, when they looked at this and they used that nationally, they started to, they realized that they could also reduce the demand because it was false demand. There wasn't real demand in there. Let me, whoops, where am I going? Sorry about that. Let me just skip. I think we're done. We're done. So, yeah, let me stop. So we have, officially we finish on the hour, but we are going to continue if there are still people left over. Now, just quickly, there's probably a load of stuff on the chat, I don't know. This is just one approach. This doesn't mean that every approach has to be this way. And when I work in organizations, I use the same overall method, but some of the ways we approach it are not the same. So, Mrunali, please, could you help out? Are you there, or will it be Adela?
I'll take over, Jen. So if anybody could, I know some people are putting kind of comments in as the session progressed, but if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. But as for now, as you were kind of talking, people were reacting, and so I. Some of it just sounding very, very familiar. So Dennis said, as you were kind of talking about the perspective shift and the paradigm shift, that you've noted that instead of looking in silo, you looked at the wider system to find a partner to tackle the issue. So this is the kind of looking into charities that might support, so supporting systems. How did you get this across to people? What was it, did you kind of started the initiative to say, well, let's look for something that could bridge this, or did you just send them off to find precedent?
It was one of the principles that they had to follow. So they had to follow it end to end. So they thought they'd come to a point where, oh, that's not our responsibility now. No, it is. So that it was a painful process initially for them, but an extremely rewarding and important one once they'd done it a few times. So the example of the garden, when they sat at the computers and they had to figure out how to solve this garden, I think they were thinking, I'm not coming back tomorrow. But when they solved it, and Ivy was so happy, it kind of like, oh, okay, let's hope we don't get too many of those. But it just went on, and the principle has to be end to end. If you design something according to a function or a department, that's just not right. Even if you don't have responsibility with the charities, you go and talk to them, you see how much you can do. You see if you can engage with them in a different way. Now, sometimes you do that and you can't engage with them differently. Fine. Okay, but we tried. So we try our best.
Here's an excellent question by Bhupinder. How would you describe the biggest differences between systems design and service design theories?
Probably the biggest insight, and maybe Mani, Mani, you're there, you've listened to this case study before and you have a good understanding of this, so you might be able to chip in. From what I understand about service design is product based and it is generally digital based. So it's based on a transactional model of designing a service, and it's looking at the interaction with the customer or the citizen. What we're doing here is doing that, but we're also going back into the back office, and we're pulling people from the back office into the world of the user, let's say, almost dragging and screaming and crying into that place.
If I were to add something to that, I would say it's not necessarily product based or digital based, but it is a service. It's a singular service within the business normally, whereas the way John does things allows you to basically, you're using design thinking. It's very reductive, and you zoom in on a single problem or a set of problems along a timeline. Whereas with systems thinking and the process John's talking about, you step right out and you change all of the paradigms. So rather than solve the problem, you change the paradigms of the problem, and a lot of the problems will disappear because of that. So I think the main difference is the zooming in and the zooming out, and where like you're solving the problem, you're trying to solve the problem, or you're intervening in the problem upstream rather than downstream. And service design tends to go downstream and deals with stuff in front of you.
Thank you, Mani.
Mani, whilst you're there, should we go with your question on pushback? Would you like to ask it yourself, or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So how much pushback do you get in the process, like during the process, and how often will stakeholders revert back to previous thinking or try to revert back to a previous process?
In this case, the owner was the assistant director, and because it's really important they're part of the team, I asked the senior sponsor to spend at least half a day a week minimum, hopefully a day a week in the first 4 weeks, so they can engage and really understand what's going on. And when he saw those measures, and when he listened to the team, and when he saw at the end of the 4 weeks how demoralized they were and how bad the system actually was, he had very little choice but to move forward. So I didn't try and convince him. I've tried that before. That doesn't work. It has to be them that see this. There are some times you do this and the sponsor pulls away and doesn't want to know. After 4 weeks, I'm not working in that organization anymore. What was the second part of your question, Mani? Sorry.
I think
stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, how often? Well, I mean, you basically answered it. It was like, how often do people step back and say, "Yeah, we're not going to go in that direction. Let's just that's too scary for us. Let's just."
Yeah, and in this case, everybody in the end-to-end in the organization, at least, was there in the team. Sometimes that's not the case. And sometimes you have to go to another department and you get rejected. Then you make sure that your sponsor is a very senior person who can then go in there and go, no, hang on, no, you've got to go in and engage with that team. You've got to learn what they're doing. So it needs that directive leadership in almost every single case. It needs that directive leadership. If you don't get that, start off at a very low level and try and get that senior person to become engaged. I've found from learning, if you don't get them engaged, they'll look at this and eventually kick you out because it's not what they want.
That rings many bells. Thank you for that. I want to go to Rachel's questions, which is, are you aware of how the new process has held up over time?
Yeah, this was in 2009, 2010. When the Guardian contacted them in 2017 or 18, they were still working this way, and the Guardian did an article on it, and they're still working this way today. That's I have to say, that's not down to me being clever or anything. This is down to them. And I did 3 other pieces of work in the same organization. So there were directors that got this from a more fundamental perspective. I would say that in a lot of the work that I do, I go back after 10 years and there's not a shred of it left, unfortunately. So this is about deep-seated change. And very often people will move from one organization to another. They take that thinking with them. So when you go back to that organization, there may be very little left.
Next, Ilias is asking, what is the most important step, or what are the most important steps in the process that you followed? If there are any very important, are they all equal?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. You have to go through each of those stages, but perhaps the more important one now, I realize, is the engagement with the leaders, which actually isn't clearly on the diagram. If you don't engage leaders in the right way, in a direct way, it doesn't matter how wonderful the design is that you're going to do. You're distancing yourself from them, so they look at it from a rational perspective. They have to feel it, they have to touch it. So before you even start understand, I do a very small piece of work, which may only last a couple of days, which is, what is the actual problem to solve? So I try and figure it out. What is the potential for the leaders to change? Are they rigid? Are they very command and control type people? Are they focused on cost? How flexible do I think they may be? And how amenable are they to this? Are they talking about systems thinking concepts? Even, as I come in, are they talking about that? That's a positive thing. If they're not, So I will design this based on my initial thoughts. If I don't think I'm going to get there with this, I will design something that's of a lower. It might even be, I've designed something that's a week sprint just to take the leaders through to get them visible on a few things that are out there that they hadn't seen before.
And I'm just going to continue with another question from Ilias, which is, as you were co-working with the stakeholders, what were the real reasons that the actors of the system could not see what was going wrong?
When I was working with the team, or before in the old system?
Ilias, you want to unmute and drop in?
Yes, thanks. In the old system, what were the real reasons that the system itself could not see what was going wrong?
Because of Adam Smith and Frederick Taylor. When you become a manager in an organization, you see an organization as a machine. You don't see it as a group of human beings with all the stuff that really happens and matters. You only see with the systems thinking lens, which are the relationships between people, the informal communications, all the rubbish that's going on in the hierarchy, the positioning, the egos, all the cheating that's going on. That's the reality of how an organization works. And in the first 4 weeks, that's what we highlight. That's what we bring up. And that's not what people see in an organization. That's the power of systems thinking.
Can I just tug onto that? I think this is a really interesting discussion, and it's something that we touched on with Crystal in the last session as well, which is, you know, when you go through these stages, how much conflict arises from uncovering the system and pain points within it.
The impact on the deputy director was that he went through this and he attempted to lead another piece of work himself, which he did quite well. And then he had to leave the organization because the rest of the organization didn't fit. He didn't fit there anymore. That was quite extreme. But you get great discomfort. But what you do get is you get people's boundaries. You get things that have been in front of their eyes for so long have suddenly been uncovered. They themselves fundamentally change if you do this right. I've had people in tears. I've had people throw things in the room and go, no, I don't accept this. Get out, John. And I never come back. All sorts of reactions. But again, don't forget, I've gone through a fundamental shift here, that it doesn't always work this way. This isn't what systemic design is always about. Sometimes it goes at a much, using Donna Meadows' points of leverage, sometimes it's not that deep. It's like number 5. So you're changing systemic elements, but you're not changing the real fundamental ways that senior people see and understand their organization. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. This isn't what I always do. I try and do this if it's the appropriate thing.
And in addition to that, Manny's asking, how do you assess the willingness to change? Do you map them into a metric of some sort, or is it all instinct?
It's based on instinct because of it through experience. So I have a chat with them, with the senior sponsor. Probably between half an hour and an hour, I can figure this out based on open questions that I ask. So I ask questions like, oh, what kind of problems do you think you have? What are your staff like? Now, if they say, oh yeah, I got a bunch of lazy people working for me, I go, oh shit, that's not good. that's not a good response. But if they say, I got good people in there, but I don't think that they're working well together, that's good. I ask them what they've actually tried themselves to improve, so that people that are interested in improvement have normally tried a few different things, etc. There are things like that, which I really actually, based on your question, maybe I should write them down somewhere. So I'll probably write them down. Thank you for that question, Manny.
Sounds good. I've got a couple of more, if that's okay with you. So
yeah, it's 5 o'clock, but I'm going to stay here until the last couple of people.
Okay, so Dan is asking, so did you change the system of the organization, or the people working in this organization? Thinking that, as you said, people left and none of the improvements stayed. They left with the people. How to make sure that the organization stays with the new system or things working?
Well, the answer to that is you have to work with the chief executive, ultimately. So in this case, the chief executive decided to stay away from this piece of work, and I engaged with the assistant director, or the deputy director, because they were quite senior, they were able to do it. Once the deputy director went to the elected members and the chief exec, everyone goes, what? Wow, shit, this is interesting. They then got more curious, and I engaged with the chief executive in the second piece of work, which wasn't very successful, by the way. The third piece of work was very successful, as like this one, and the fourth piece of work wasn't very successful. So 2 good, 2 not so good. But I worked with different directors, and I worked with the chief executive, who shortly after I finished working with him, the chief executive left. And I better not say anything.
Okay, thanks for that. Which takes us to Ilias's last question. And Ilias says, thank you, John. Finally, how did you secure the consensus of consensus of the definition of the system's purpose, the desirability, the legitimacy, ethical issues, feasible, gosh, this is a big question, feasibility and traction of the new system in order for the system to remain relevant with also changing needs of the future?
Okay, that's actually a really good question, because one of the problems that you have, if people have to leave and you want to connect on LinkedIn or want to have further conversations, happy to. When you go to SI and you look at the list of tools that you have, or you look at some of the things that people are doing, you think, oh gosh, I better use this tool, and I've got to look at values, I've got to look at different stakeholder needs, I've got to look at, hang on, I've got to look at the question properly again. I've got to look at ethical issues, feasibility, and when you listen to citizens, actually you realize that all the other stuff is secondary. So when you listen to citizens, that becomes the purpose. So the first time I learned this, because when I was doing this, I had a mentor who knew everything, and I was just learning. And my mentor was visiting me, which didn't happen very often. So I was quite nervous. And I had this group of people in a team, this was different service, different organization. And I was with them. There was 2 of us. We were both learning. And we spent over an hour, very frustrating hour, with this team, trying to come up with what the bloody purpose was. Everybody had an opinion, right? Oh no, and then we were trying to push. That wasn't a good opinion, so we're trying to push it. And no, and it, oh God, almost coming to blows. And I both of us were exhausted, and we were embarrassed that it didn't work in front of our mentor. And the mentor goes, John, have you forgotten that you've got to do it from the customer's perspective? Oh shit. So we just tried again, right? And we said, I don't want to know what you think the purpose was. What, for the people that come into your service, how would they define the purpose? And they go, oh, that's easy. It's this. It took 5 minutes. And ever since that moment, that's how I do it. You do not ask people in the organization what they think the purpose is. Oh my goodness. No. The purpose has to be the customer's perspective only. That is the most powerful one thing I do in this. If I don't do that, the rest of it, forget it, because it all hinges on that purpose. That purpose then aligns everybody, regardless of who you are. You could be someone in the IT department, finance, audit, or a stakeholder in a different organization. So, well, this is the purpose. And they go, I don't agree with that. Well, that's it. It's not there to agree or disagree. It's what the customers say it is. And they go, oh, right. You can't argue with that, because that's it. And if they want to know more, put the headsets on and actually listen. So really good question. Thank you, Elias.
Another great one from Rachel. Even if people leave and the organization reverts, the potential impact of people taking the knowledge onto other places seems like good systemic pollination in the long term.
Yeah, and it took me actually quite a long time to be comfortable with that, because when you go to an organization several years later, it's kind of all gone all over the place. It's really demoralizing. So when I realized that people would take this to other organizations and then attempt themselves to have a go and to absorb that learning, put that learning into that organization, made me realize that actually that's what was going on here. Systems thinking is a thinking thing. So, yeah.
Okay, I think people are dropping out very slowly. There's no questions left in the chat unless somebody wants to chip in last minute or unmute their mic. And what's this? Elias saying, don't know if this is true.
Yes, Elias, the Amazon meeting. That's actually a really good tactic, where you have people in a room and you go, right, the customer's sitting in here, or the citizen, and everyone like, what? Especially in the public sector, my goodness, they're not used to that. But that's a very powerful way because this is about paradigms, this is about models. So when you do that, you're doing something physical in a room. And that's where you get the deeper learning. This is about storytelling, telling and narratives. What I did today was tell a story. Yeah. Now you've got to do that. You've got to replicate that with senior people. That's why I don't write reports. And the empty chair, because you then turn to the chair, you start talking to the damn thing, you know, it becomes real. And then you can have far better discussions. So thanks for that. Yeah.
I have a question. How do you get good at this stuff without working live at it? Because there's not many tools to practice on, and there's not like a process you can learn. Like with service design, you can learn design thinking process on various different things. And because this is so much about thinking, how do you train yourself to think the right things at the right time? And how do you even know like when that is?
The first two answers perhaps that I know. The first answer is work with someone that has got more experience. That's very difficult. So yeah, I understand that. I was extremely lucky. I worked with an organization that had developed this method in the early 2000s. And the second answer to that question, which is the more practical one, is to read about experiences like this. In particular, read about experiences that haven't worked. And I have, in the beginning, there were more that didn't work than worked. And luckily that kind of changed over time. Or you engage with people like me and say, John, can we have a Zoom call? And start off with something that you've got. So if you're working in an organization, start off with something small that you think you can do that might make a change. Try and get the attention of your manager and say, hey, there's a problem over here. I wonder if maybe we can tackle it. But have the confidence that there is a problem that you can tackle. Don't take on a whole service transformation. Don't do that. I wouldn't even, no, I wouldn't recommend you do that. But start off somewhere small and have a go at something and apply the principles. It's the principles that are important, not the whole deep thing. And see if you can make a difference in one area, even if it's just something minor. Use things like the iceberg model, which is in what I've done, but I haven't described it because we didn't have enough time. Take a problem and see if you can, on your own time, use the iceberg model. Oh, look, this is all the things. Let's see if I can engage my manager or engage my colleagues and use this as a framework and say, hey, have you got 10 minutes? Can I just figure something out? Got this problem, but is it not that it's caused by this? Is it not caused by this? Is it not caused by this? Practice. If you're not in an organization, when you do work in one, do whatever you're doing and try to move in that direction. And I know, Mani, you are probably wanting better answers. And maybe Peter Jones's book from last week, things like that are helpful. But yeah, engage with people and bug them. Yeah, there we go. Bug people like me and see if you can get them to engage. That's the role of people like me, is to help and pass this on free of charge. This is what I do. Sometimes I also charge for it when you do my workshop, but that's not the point. Well, the reason I'm in SI is because I'm here to help people. That I was in that position some time ago and I know what it's like.
Okay, I've got one more question from Rachel. I imagine lots of pushback on the lack of report. When you said that, I could just see the chat going, oh, no report. How do you address that?
Yeah, so I have to be clever about it because I'm coming in from outside the organization. I can be a little bit awkward. I can be a little bit, I don't want to use the word arrogant. I can be seen to be a little bit arrogant. What I say is, oh, okay. So this was the last organization I worked with. The members steering committee wanted me to write a report to them. And I said, oh, okay. So what I do is I do two things. Oh, can I come and show you what we're doing? And they go, oh, okay. So book a meeting, an hour, 10 o'clock on a Friday. Right. Okay, great. I go to their office. I drag them out of the office and I take them to the team room, the room where the team are, and we do stuff in there. After half an hour, they are absolutely sold. If that's not appropriate, with the steering committee, they didn't want to meet me. They didn't want to do anything. They wanted a report. I said, I don't do reports. This is what I do. So I always give them the alternative immediately. And what we did there is the team did show and tells. And we did show and tells that on a certain day for half an hour, anyone can come and the team come to the room and the team will just stand up and say, this is what we've been doing for a week. So one person from that steering committee, after a long time, came to the show and tell. And when she came to the show and tell, she goes, oh my God, this is fantastic. And she tried to convince other people from the steering committee to come. Not one of them would come. But I did not write report. And the reason I don't write report is the moment I write a report, the misunderstanding starts. I've done that a few times. Every time I've done it, I've gone, that didn't work. And I've now said I don't do reports. Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
And that's it. Let's just see if there's anything
Thank you
else.
very much, everybody.
Yeah, just more comments on reports.
Yeah, this is an example also of co-design. So obviously I design it with the organization. They design it. Even if I have an idea of where it should go, they design it. And it's also co-designed with the citizen. So their demands create the design, the new design. Anyway, thank you for all the thanks and all that kind of stuff. Thank you.
John, I just wanted to squeeze the last question in. The books that you mentioned or the system that you mentioned, what books would you recommend? Because we've had a conversation before and you recommended, what was the dude's name? The grey and yellow books.
Yeah, if you like theory and if you like your head,
Oh, that's a great one.
if you know a lot about theory and you're not starting from scratch, I'm in the middle of reading this and I haven't moved in the last many weeks. I haven't moved it from there. This is a very difficult read, but it has this is the most fundamental book that all the people I know otherwise, Peter Jones and everybody, they're only scratching the surface of what's in here. It's out of print. It's very expensive to buy unless you can find it on eBay or something like that. It's been a while, and it's where the double diamond comes from. It was published in 1996. The Design Council double diamond came from here.
Who's that by? Is that
simplified
Richard
it
Buchanan?
immensely.
Who's that by? Is it Richard Buchanan?
Bella Banati. Sorry. I just throw this thing around as though everybody knows it. And yeah, so I would have recommended it before I read it, and now I'm not so sure. And it's a good question. I am actually writing my own book. God knows if I'll ever finish it, because there are no books. I'm trying my best to write a book. I'm about a quarter of the way through.
Well, we've got something to look forward to, John. Hey, thanks for that. I think we're done with the questions. People are kind of dropping out now. But yeah, let's
you know what? I was thinking of the Vanguard method. Like you mentioned that time.
Okay, sorry, you're absolutely right. Marnie, thank you.
Sorry, this is just a book full of
You can see why I need money. This is interesting. This is a book that is the original methodology that I follow. It doesn't have all the complexity in there, and it doesn't have the triple diamond in the same way, but it is the basis of where I learned it from originally. Yes, that's good actually. Yeah, I do recommend this to people.
Thank you.
It's by John Seddon, Seddon. And he got it from he got a lot of this from mostly systems thinking and also Toyota. Toyota are, I think, the best example of systemic design, and they did it in the 1960s to 80s. So, yeah. Right, everybody. Thank you so much. Anyway, let's continue. If any of you want to continue the conversation in the organizations group in SI, it's not very populated, so I'd be really happy to post stuff on there and whatever, have further conversations. Thank you, everybody. Are we done? I'll wait till the last person goes. I promise that. Thank
Cheers,
you, Manny.
everybody. Cheers, John.
Cheers. Bye. Thank you, Mrinali. Thanks, Manny, again.
No
I
problem.
need
I
people
guess
like you.
just press stop recording. Maybe.
Oh yeah.
If you've got time, we'll have a chat.
Yeah, great idea.